Oscars this year are not looking hot. On years like this, where there's no obvious standout, in a funny way, the one that actually ends up winning, the award actually ends up meaning a little bit more. For example, let's think about 2022. For me, I can't think of any film that was nominated that year except for one, Coda, which actually ended up winning. And so that's what we're dealing with this year. We have a list of 10 Best Picture nominees, all of them battling it out for that one spot in film history. These are the 10 Best Picture nominees for 2025, ranked based on my opinion. Number 10. This film, which deals with the lived experience of being transgender and drug cartel violence and human trafficking in Mexico, these very politically heavy topics. There's this idea that Emilia Perez failed because it just didn't do a good job at politically representing all of these very complicated topics. And I think that that's a very fair point, but what I want to just say is that this film was just bad.
No, because you are pretty.
It doesn't tell a good story, the music is horrible, and that's really it for me. Number 9. Ultimately, I think what really sucks about Emilia Perez, we're just due for a really good original movie musical.
Something has changed within me.
She doesn't give a twink when anyone thinks.
A lot of people enjoyed Wicked this year, but for me, it was one of the most painful films to sit through. And I think when you have a film like this that uses CGI so heavily, you have to ask, where does that decision come from? And I think creatively it just doesn't really make sense, given that it comes from this Broadway stage musical where everything is literally practical. The success of this story on Broadway always came from its practical innovations.
Little ways to flirt, you clowns.
And now you have a film which is made, in a sense, as cheaply as possible, with the sole purpose of bringing people to the theater and making sure that they pay money to see something that lacks any kind of creative originality. Number 8. What trailers understand nowadays is that spoilers are not the thing that are going to keep people from going to the theater. It's actually the opposite. When people don't know much about a film or what it's about, it can be really difficult to go because ultimately you're sacrificing 2 hours of your life for something that you're just not totally sure is going to be worth your time. And now you have films that come out that rely on the audience's knowledge of what the subject matter is or is trying to get at.
My mother's watch.
A deck of marked cards. My big toenail.
That's all you got?
The film is about these 2 young black boys who are sent to a reformatory school where a lot of personal atrocities occur. The film is about survival, it's about perseverance. The film is directed by Ramel Ross, who takes a very daring, creative approach, where every shot in the film is a point of view shot. Ultimately, the point of view perspective is meant to preserve the golden innocence that these boys are slowly losing at the school. I think maybe what the filmmakers failed to consider is how the point of view shots really change the way that an audience can consume this subject matter. These actors are stuck talking to a camera. Actors are good at feeling what is appropriate in the moment in terms of timing, but it's very difficult to really understand how the scene is being consumed. And it's the editor's job, as somebody who is literally watching the scene being played back, to change the timing and to change things up in a way that is fitting for the consumption of the product. But in this case, the actors don't get that extra level of performance of somebody else going in there and kind of changing their performance in a way that is more digestible. And what you ultimately end up with are these performances that feel incredibly stunted. They're not acting with another human being. They're not responding to a human being. They're acting in a very theoretical way, not in a very personal way. And I think that that really takes away from what the film ultimately is trying to get at, because it's a film that is trying to talk about the human condition, but the actors are not allowed or able to really have that connection with their fellow actors and the other people that exist in the world of that character. Number 7. I've already said a lot about Dune Part 2 in my other video on my channel, but the reason that I'm putting Dune Part 2 here is because it's just not that good.
In the shadows of Arrakis lie many secrets, but the darkest of them all may remain.
This film was very forgettable for me in a way that was very disappointing because of how the first film set everything up, really raised a ton of questions about the world and what it represented and how things worked. I think honestly part 2 just answered too many of those questions. You have this huge idea of destiny, and I just think it all converges in a way that is a little bit too clean and a little bit too majestic. People online are always talking about how the books have so much more to them. Part 2 didn't really respect that. It felt like you have this one destined character where everything just kind of is heading in a very specific direction. Like we already had Iron Man, you know? Number 6. My roommate and I started this comedy skits channel on YouTube, and we did this skit that was based on the film Anora, and my friend Annalise and I played these 2 characters who just saw the film but want to debrief about it in the park. Wow!
You liked it?
I loved it. Anora is like my favorite movie of the year.
Huh.
You didn't like it?
You didn't like the first part of the movie?
Yeah, I didn't like the first part of the movie that took place in a strip club. What did you like about it, Ryan?
And it becomes very clear to her character that my character is just like a big fan of this movie just because I'm just like a boy who like enjoyed seeing like boobs and stuff on screen.
Have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself? Younger, more beautiful, more perfect.
I think this film, there is kind of this meta element of like, wow, look at how much you enjoyed the first part of this movie. Look at how much you liked it when there was like this very attractive young woman who was naked on screen. Boom. What happens when that changes and now there's like this old woman whose body is becoming more and more grotesque and disgusting? How do you like that now, huh? What do you think of the before now, huh? And it's like somehow now it has been kind of reversed in the reception of the film, where now the disgustingness and the grotesqueness of the older woman's body has been like received very positively, of like the practical effects are so good, what a genius way to represent this idea. And then nobody's really like trying to talk about how intriguing the nakedness of the young woman might have been, because ultimately it is kind of this like really weird thing to talk about, where it's like, so what did you think about that super hot girl on screen that was like super naked and that's probably what kept your interest? Yeah, it's just like, you know, I personally in movies, like I just prefer it when the women are clothed, because I'm just like a guy who really wants to get to know the female characters' personalities and stuff. Number 5. There's a funny story with this movie where my friend recommended me this movie. We had kind of talked about it before it had come out, and then she was like, you should go see it. But in the same text, she also sent like, oh, I'd fallen asleep for 40 minutes also. But it was really great and you should go see it, and I really liked it. And I just think it's really funny that you can kind of like enjoy a movie, but also being asleep for so much of it was just kind of this really funny idea.
No sane man would want the papacy. The men who are dangerous are the ones who do want it.
But then I went and saw this movie and I fell asleep. Number 4. He's in these incredibly massive blockbuster movies with these leading roles.
You see, I'm something of a magician, inventor, and chocolate maker.
He's on freaking College Game Day, and of course he knows all these facts and statistics about all these like niche college football teams. He's dating Kylie Jenner. There's something about him being at the peak of his career, and it feels like this film is the first opportunity out of the many that he's had where he could actually really, really fail.
Oh, where have you been, my darling young one?
He has 6 years to try and perfect this process of becoming Bob Dylan the artist. He very notably has learned way more songs than he actually needs to sing. He's learned the guitar, he's taken lessons with like some of the best dialogue and vocal coaches in Hollywood, and he's doing it all right. You kind of spend the whole movie like enjoying his reproduction of Bob's music, but there is like this like kind of quality that's missing about it. And in a way that's almost more interesting than if he had perfectly recreated Bob Dylan. Number 3. I think out of all of the films this year, the one that is continuing to grow on me is I'm Still Here.
Ô pai,
Eu achava que Playboy era quem ficava bebendo uísque, fumando charuto o dia inteiro.
What separates it beyond all these other films is just that it goes about its storytelling in a way that is filled with love and filled with care. I mean, from the second the film starts, you can just kind of feel that the filmmakers and the actors, they just knew what they were trying to do. They had a very clear purpose. Number 2. There's only 2 movies left on this list to talk about, which are Anora and The Brutalist. There is something to be said about how both of these films in some way fail in the second half. It's almost like a Dune Part 1 and a Dune Part 2. Like the Part 1 is just building the world and building the characters. And there's a very clear, like, how do we get from one scene to the next scene? Well, it's just a matter of like getting this character set up. But then the second half is kind of where the more difficult work comes because all of the background work has been set up. Now you just need to find the story that is told in a way that can kind of bridge the audience's experience from just a matter of understanding to a matter of like really elevating the experience of consuming the movie. Both of them don't necessarily reach a point where that slow burn elucidates something that you wouldn't have otherwise necessarily deciphered from the first half or the setup of the movie.
When dogs get sick, they often bite the hand of those who fed them until someone mercifully puts them down.
The thing that makes The Brutalist just a little bit less meaningful of a movie for me is not actually the AI, which did kind of piss me off, I'm not gonna lie, but it's the secondary characters. It's the tertiary characters on the edges of the world of the protagonist, because both films are very protagonist-dominated films, but ultimately it's the cast, it's the larger cast of Anora that I feel like really finds a place within your heart. I think with The Brutalist, the wife kind of becomes this shell that is defined by the conflict that she has with Laszlo. The patron, the person who creates strife and trouble for Laszlo. Again, it feels like he is a character that serves to provide and take away, but always in relation to Laszlo. Number 1. There's this kind of like separate life that each of the characters have in Anora.
Well, you did tell them, right?
Иван-Джан, открой дверь, пожалуйста.
Vanya, should I call 911?
Ты женился на какой-то проститутке?
What?
There's life that is kind of bred by what I assume is Sean Baker's directing style. In the strip club, the way that they chose to film a lot of those establishing shots is just to tell all the supporting cast to just participate in the scene as if they were actually at a strip club. And they just on a long telephoto lens, they just follow Anora as she just exists with amongst them because the actors are living as the people that they're playing. For me, Anora is this year's Best Picture.